Welcome back to Tales of Knights and Magic. Subscribe if you like, and now get comfortable, and enjoy this glimpse into the world of fantasy. Desh Calder woke before dawn, as he did every day, to the hushed corridor of the City Watch's archive vault. The lamps along the walls were still unlit, the air cool and faintly damp with the scent of parchment and stone. He moved silently, slipping past stacked shelves of ledgers and reports until he reached his own desk, a chipped oaken table scarred by years of quill pricks and ink spills. He lit a single lantern, its flicker chasing shadows across the walls. Around him lay the morning's intake, tax assessments, missing person notices, minor theft reports. These were routine, banal matters that most clerks processed without thought. But Desh saw patterns where others saw only obscurity. He sharpened his quill, dipped it in ink, and examined the first document, a tax collector's log from the threshing district. The collector, Albrecht Marrow, had signed for the delivery of grain shipments 3 times a week for the past month. On paper, everything was accounted for. Yet Desh's eyes caught the subtlest anomalies. He traced Marrow's signature, noticing how the final flourish looped differently than usual. The seal's edge pressed over the watermark at an odd angle. Desh closed his eyes and let his mind replay the moment the log was written. The soft rustle of paper, the tap of the quill, the slight hesitation in Marrow's breathing when the hallway guard stepped past. In his memory replay, Desh saw how the signer had lingered, adding an extra twist to the T, infusing the mark with deliberate precision. Opening his eyes, Desh jotted a margin note. Anomaly A, Marrow's signature misaligned. He paged through the log's entries, scanning Marrow's name wherever it appeared. By the time the lantern's flame dipped low, he had flagged half a dozen pages with identical quirks. Each one coincided with shipments marked heavy by exactly 5 bushels more than the preceding week. A pattern unfolded. Someone was systematically inflating records to siphon extra grain out of the official tally. He leaned back, rubbing his temple. His gift, once a useless oddity, now shaped his world. Where others saw static entries, he saw living events frozen in time. A boot scuff here, the echo of a whispered promise there. Every ledger held layers of truth. If you knew how to read the traces left behind. He stood and stretched, the chair creaking in protest. Beyond the vault's arched door, torches guttered to life as other clerks arrived. He gathered the flagged pages into a neat stack and tucked them under his arm. Tonight he would present his findings to Lieutenant Maron Clements. Desh doubted the lieutenant would need more than a glance to see the forgery's artistry, but Maron respected precision. Desh found Maron in the muster room, pacing before a large map of the city's districts. The lieutenant's one good eye tracked Desh Detrida's approach. Late, Maron said without reproach, noting the pages. Found something. Desh laid the pages on the tape. Tax logs from Maron at the threshing district. Look at the seals and signatures. He pointed to the first page. Here, the watermark sits beneath the seal's edge. That shouldn't happen. The clerk always aligns them flush. And here, he tapped the margin note. The flourishes match this repeated mistake. Maron leaned in, reading each annotation. You're right, that's not a clerk's slip. Someone's forging the collector's hand. He straightened and met Desh's gaze. Good work. This goes beyond petty theft. They're stealing from the city's granaries. We stopped that tonight. Desh nodded. I've traced the anomalies to warehouses 5 through 8 at the Alabaster docks. The patterns correspond exactly with the days those docks received tax shipment. Maron cracked a rare grin. Then we'll lay a trap at the docks. You come with me, we'll catch the forgers red-handed. Desh's pulse quickened. He had never been in the field. His world had been paper and ink, yet this was his chance to see his deductions in action. An hour later they stood beneath the moonlit eaves of the Alabaster docks. The tide was low. Boats rested on keel lines, red clay warehouses loomed overhead, and driftwood debris lay tangled in slick seaweed. Maron's watchmen assembled behind crates and barrel stacks. 6 in all, crossbows cocked. Desh carried only his lantern and his forged pattern dossier. He consulted his notes by lantern light, then motioned to a narrow alley between warehouses 5 and 6. They're using that side entrance, he whispered. 2 men with saddlebags carrying sealed crates. They'll emerge in 5 minutes. Maron nodded. On my mark. He crouched, signaling the watchman. Desh felt the hum of adrenaline but remained calm. He closed his eyes and summoned his replay gift once more. The echo of footsteps on wood, the scrape of boots on stone, the soft click of a latch. He heard the uneasy rhythm of the smuggler's breathing. At Maron's hand signal they moved. 2 crossbow bolts thudded into the alley's shadow. A shout. Maron kicked open the door. Desh stepped forward, lantern held high. Crates stamped with the city seal lay empty, but for leftover seal wax fragments matching his flagged anomalies. Two figures dock hands, Corbin and Solace froze. Solace dropped his sack. Corbin held up ink-stained hands. We didn't know, Solace rasped. We were paid. Dash's voice was firm. By whom? He traced the wax strips on the floor to a loose panel in the floorboards. Pulling aside a core mat, he revealed a hidden hat. They're staging from below. Maron cursed and ordered the watchman to secure the dock hands. Dash descended into the cellar with Maron at his side. Within, lantern light illuminated stacks of forged ledgers and duplicate seals, evidence of an organized ring. Toward the back crouched a single figure bent over a desk. Delvin Shore, a Salo Council scribe, whose reporting clerk's seal matched every forged impression. Dash closed his eyes and replayed the ledger's pages on the spot. Delvin's precise quill strokes. The moment he pressed his seal twice in a single breath, the faint tug of desperation in his mind. Maron's sword tip met Delvin's nape. Enough. Dash stepped between them. He'll confess. The ledger's evidence is airtight. Delvin sagged, clutching the desk edge. I had debts, he croaked. Debts for your wife's cure, Dash said gently, recalling the half-heard bribe negotiations on the ledger's margin. But your actions jeopardized every farmer in the threshing district. Delvin closed his eyes. I see that now, he whispered. Maron barked orders to his men. Take him in. Calder, you'll finish the report. In the flicker of lantern light, Dash rose from the cellar floor, trading the heavy weight of his lantern for the lighter heft of the ledger pages he'd confiscated. The watchman led Delvin away. Outside, the hush of the docks settled again. Back in the archive vault before dawn, Dust worked by the lone lantern's glow. His quill scratched across fresh parchment as he mapped each forged entry to its warehouse origin, documenting timestamps, seal anomalies, merchant rates. By candle end he had drafted a 3-part dossier. 1. The signature and seal analysis. 2. The warehouse network. 3. The suspect ledger's pattern of bribes and debts. Maron found him there, fatigue lining his face but pride in his eyes. You're thorough, he said. By midday, you'll present this to the council. Today, Deputy Commander Vale wants your input on fortifying Fort Greenhold. Raiders mass in the north. Des blinked, mind already shifting. Where ledger pages had been his battlefield, now lay blueprint maps and hammer-drawn barricade sketches. His gift could replay troop formations, supply movements, old siege paths. He closed the dossier, tucked his quill away, and met Maron's gaze. I'll be there, he said, standing. The archive shelves loomed overhead, silent witnesses to crimes solved and battles won on paper. Des felt a thrill of anticipation. The world beyond ink beckoned, battlefields and strategy halls lay ahead. He blew out the lantern, plunging the vault into darkness. The ledger's pattern was complete, but his story had only begun. As he ascended the stairs, footsteps echoing. Des Calder, the Decipherer, prepared to rewrite his destiny, one hidden truth at a time. Distant church bells tolled across the cobbled streets of Moorgate, as dawn light crept through high windows in the Citadel's War Council chamber. Des Calder sat near the head of a long scarred wood table, maps and ledgers spread before him. Lieutenant Maron Clemens leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, while Deputy Commander Vale surveyed Des' trap designs with a critical eye. Your pit and stake line here, Vale said, tapping a sharpened stylus against the map's faint grid lines, will funnel the raiders into a narrow kill zone. But they've used diversionary tactics before. Fun smoke dummies on horseback will need secondary defense. Des absorbed the words, fingertips brushing over his margin notes. He thought through his living replay of past skirmishes, how the raiders struck from moonlit hillsides, how their scouts probed for unguarded gaps. He closed his eyes for a moment, picturing the Wolf's Gorge topography, the sheer basalt walls on either side. Tapping back into memory, he focused on the raiders' formation patterns, their shield wall rhythm, the cadence of their war drums, the predictable pause as they crossed broken ground. I suggest we stagger our trap lines in 2 tiers, he said, opening his eyes. First line at the gorge entrance, angled to funnel survivors back into the second line 500 paces further in. We can use camouflaged pits the first night, then have incendiary pots ready to drop on their second wave. Crossbow volleys from elevated platforms will cover both gaps. Marion grunted approval. Good. We'll task the engineers to position 2 siege ladders and 3 floating catapults on the ridge above. That gives us both the funnel and the fire support. Vale nodded. And your menus, your notes on raider scouting patterns will help time our counter ambush. The brambles here conceal a side trail they favor. If we station a half platoon in brush covers at daybreak, they'll never slip past. Des sketched the additional guard posts on the map, each marked with a small rune denoting watch schedule. His gaze flicked to the ledger of raider sightings pinned to the wall, reports of campfires at dusk, faint hoofprints in mud. the wail of wind-driven horns at midnight that signaled raider drums. Each detail had been filed by clerks who never questioned the raw data. Decipherer, reconstructing each fleeting memory in his mind. Now his patterns shaped strategy. Vale spread her arms. Fort Greenhold will stand. That much I trust to your designs. Prepare your orders. By noon we depart for the path. You'll ride with our point detachment to oversee the installations. Des rose, gathering his maps and ledger. His pulse thrummed, not with fear but anticipation. The city watch clerk had become a strategist for war. He followed Moran and Vale out of the chamber, the echo of footfalls on stone beneath a bannered archway proclaiming honor and defense. The road to Fort Greenhold wound east from Moorgate through rolling farmland. By midday a mounted escort of 30 militia riders fell in step behind Decipherer's small riding group. Decipherer on a rawhide saddle, Vale's standard-bearer, Moran and 2 dispatch riders, a supply wagon, and a cart of engineering tools, trailed just behind. As they passed fields of ripening grain, farmers paused in their work, tipping straw hats at the banners of the City Watch and the War Council. Vale rode up alongside Des. "You look well," she said, voice carrying above the hoofbeats. "Not every clerk handles frontier duty." Des allowed a brief smile. "Nothing beats seeing plans in motion. The ledger's one thing. This is another." She nodded. "We'll need your eyes when we hit the gorge. Watch for anything. Wolf prints, low drifts, smoke signals." At the village of Westwatch they paused for provision. Des oversaw the unloading of supplies, sharpened stakes, powder kegs, nets and tripwires. He arranged the stakes in neat bundles, counting them against his map's tally. 200 stakes for the first line, 300 for the second, each stake sharpened to a perfect point. Each camouflage net folded according to his instructions, so it could unfurl silently. That evening, Des sat by the wagon's campfire, the ledger report open on his lap. A cold breeze drifted down from the distant mountain. He sipped broth from a tin cup, and let his mind replay the gorge's recent scout reports. Raiders had been sighted, crossing the river at dusk, sometimes wading thigh-deep. They favored light pack horses for speed. He traced their trail in his mind's eye, then sketched the last-minute reposition of a watchpost closer to the river bend. A shallow ford they might use if the main pass was too hot. "You'll freeze in that cold," Miron called from his own fire ring. "Come warm yourself." Des moved over, tucking the ledger away. Miron passed him a blanket of coarse wool. "Good eyes," he said shortly, voices low for the campsite's half-asleep militia. "Fort Greenhold will owe you a debt." Des nodded, wrapping himself in the blanket. "I owe the farmers too. If we hold the pass they eat next season." Miron grunted. "Idealist. Field commands are blunt instruments, but I'll admit this blunt instrument has finesse." Des rested his head and closed his eyes. The rattle of horse hooves in the distance told him the raiders were near. He felt the first shiver of excitement. Battle was not a ledger's calm pages but the real fight. Tomorrow every stake and formation would prove its worth. Dawn's pale light revealed the gully of Wolf's Gorge tremoring with mist. Des walked the shallow riverbed toward the first stake line, flanked by Vale and Miron. Engineering squads in leather aprons moved silently, prodding the ground and brushing loose earth atop net covers. Des knelt at the edge of the first pit, lantern casting a glow on the camouflaged netting. He pressed a fingertip into the soil, hearing the hollow echo beneath. Perfect. Vale joined him. "No gaps?" she asked. Des shook his head. "Each pit covers a 3-pace gap. Net and stakes rise just inside. Any rider who falls will find themselves impaled. And if they dismount, crossbowmen on the rim will finish the rest." Miron waved a hand downstream. "Second line is ready too, just below the old stone arch. We'll hold the high ground there." Des climbed the southern ridge and saw the second line stakes protruding from dugouts, crossbow nests at regular intervals. The men in chainmail bristled behind small barricades of timber and stone. Beyond them, the gorge narrowed to a rocky ledge. Mighty wind echoed through the gorge like a warning horn. Des felt the set's urgent tremor beneath his boots. The raiders were approaching. He burned one last glance over the gorge's width. Every trap, every trapper's position, every firing lane lay before him like a living map. A sudden shout from the scouts on the northern ridge. Raiders at 2 o'clock. Hundreds of dark shapes advanced down the slope, lammergers on light horses, their standards whipping in the wind. Des' pulse quickened. The first wave closed on the track. He watched as a column of riders thundered over the pit line, hooves thudding on hidden netting. Horses screamed as they sank into stakes. Men toppled into the pits. The second wave hit the arch. Lances splintered, shields buckled under the crossbow bolts. Des leaned forward, fists tightening. His plan had worked. From the ridge, Moran's voice rose. "Hold fire until they regroup." Des let his mind replay the opening seconds. Timing. Formation break. Rider panic. He snapped back into the moment and called to Vale. Now, she signaled the crossbowman. Bolts whistled, finding chinks in armor. Raiders fell in droves. Behind him, Moran rode down the center, sword flashing. Vale's standard fluttered as she lashed back to the second line, rallying militia. Desh backed away, heart racing. This was war. Moments later, the raider horde collapsed in broken lines, survivors turning tail and racing up the slopes from which they had come. Desh stood on the ridge, watching them vanish into the mist. A ray of light broke through the gorge's mouth, illuminating the fallen stakes and scattered men. He felt a swell of emotion, relief, triumph, awe at what his patterns could do when brought life. Moran approached, sword in hand, eyes blazing. By the gods, Calder, you did it. He gripped Desh's shoulder, voice a low roar. You held the pass with fewer than 20 casualties. You're one of us now. Desh fed his gaze, sweat cooling on his brow. I saw the pattern, he said quietly. We just built the trap. Moran laughed, clanging Desh's shoulder with his gauntlet. Today we have a hero, tomorrow, the Empire will need a tactician. Desh allowed himself a small grin. The forge of battle had tempered him in ways ledger entries never could. He looked down into the gorge, and saw the stakes still glinting in dawn light, the fallen raiders' shapes stirring in the dust. Each trap, each arrow, each command had woven together in a pattern far greater than any forged document. He turned back to Moran, voice steady. Then I'm at your command. Moran's grin widened. Good, we move in 2 hours to reinforce the frontier. But tonight you dine with the commander. They'll want to hear how a clerk keeps a fortress. Desh nodded, glancing at the scattered bodies below. I have stories. As the two men headed back to camp, Desh felt the weight of his gift settle into his shoulders. Not just the clerk's quill, but the strategist's mantle. The ledger of tax forgeries had been his first puzzle, the gorge his first battlefield. Beyond lay sieges, fortress design, sprawling wars, and Desh Calder, the Decipherer, would write them all in living replay. The late afternoon sun burned low as Desh Calder rode into the outer courtyard of Fort Cliffhaven, the frontier stronghold newly reinforced at his direction. Shell walls rose before him, crowned with crenellations and watchtowers, while banners of the Empire's sable griffins snapped in brisk breeze. Behind him trailed Captain Moran's militia, the City Watch veterans, and a handful of Greenhold survivors, whose praise of Desh's trap at Wolf's Gorge still rang in their voices. Desh urged his mount toward the main gate, where Lieutenant Vale and the fort's commander, Captain Ryland Fervor, awaited beside a table strewn with maps. Ferv's iron-gray hair caught the sun's last light as he stepped forward. The commission sends its regards, he said, voice gruff. Your reputation precedes you, Clerk Calder, now field strategist. Are you prepared to brief our officers? Desh has dismounted, gathering his satchels of sketchbooks, quills, and ciphered notes. Yes, Captain. I've laid out the defensive sectors, mapped potential incursion routes, and highlighted vantage points for mobile traps. He unrolled a large parchment across the table, a detailed topographical chart of the valley plateau and the 5 ravine passes leading to the heartland. Each pass was annotated with trap layouts, sightlines, and supply routes. Ferv leaned in. 6 passes here, labeled Alpha through Zeta. Which one worries you most? Desh traced a finger along the northern ridge. Pass Gamma, the Mosswood Ravine. It's narrow, densely forested, and ideal for ambush. Raiders used it last season to slip past us. I recommend a 2-tiered cordon, concealed pits at the entrance, followed by a tripwire-activated volley line 200 paces further in. He flicked to his margin notes, soil compaction tests, pit dimensions, timing of manual resets. Maron spoke up. And this detachment? He pointed to a cluster of red icons. You assign militia here. They'll need orders. Desh acknowledged it. 30 infantrymen with crossbows in concealed stands, supported by a mobile reserve at the overlook tower. I've sketched a signaling code. Mirror flashes by day, torch patterns by night, to relay enemy movement swiftly. Vale unsheathed the small adze from her belt and tapped the map. Once they're funneled through Gamma, they collide with Delta's trap complex, rockfall triggers, and blast pots. Then we hammer them with cavalry from Hill Echo. Fair's eyes gleamed. A solid plan. Tomorrow at dawn we begin construction. Today you dine with the commander. They'll want strategy detailed. Des nodded and collected his charts. As he followed Moran through the gate, the wind carried the clang of hammer on metal and the chatter of engineers clearing brush. He paused to study the blacksmith's forges, where crow's foot shovels and sharpened stakes were forged for him, and felt the quiet thrill of seeing his designs come alive in steel and sweat. That night, the fort's great hall glowed with torchlight. Long tables groaned under platters of roasted boar, crusty breads, barrels of spiced ale. Des sat between Captain Favre and Major Alara Dan, the cavalry commander whose mounted regiments thundered across the frontier plains. Each feast was a gauntlet, camaraderie woven with politics, toasts layered with barbed praise. Major Dan raised her goblet. To the Decipherer, may your mind continue to outwit our enemies. She grinned and clinked her cup against Des. The hall's officers followed suit, some cheer, some polite nods. Des drank, then let the lantern light reveal a half-hidden officer reclining in a dark corner. Commander Terrian Voss, head of the Frontier Watch. Voss's uniform bore silver filigree, his gaze cold. He lifted an eyebrow at Des, then flicked his attention elsewhere as Des returned his focus to the meal. Between bites of roasted pheasant, Des outlined his Gamma Pass strategy for Favre and Dan, who peppered him with questions about supply constraints and engineer fatigue. He answered with calm, citing rest rotations, ration adjustments, and animated diagrams. When Voss finally strode forward, Des braced himself. Clerk Calder, Voss said, bowing stiffly. Your traps at Wolf's Gorge were effective, but here at Cliffhaven, you rely heavily on militia and static defenses. I propose we assign regular Frontier Watch companies, battle-hardened troops, to your primary kill zones. Their discipline will hold better when traps falter. Des met his gaze. Commander, the militia are local men who know the terrain, swift to respond if traps need resetting. Our regular watch is spread thin, perhaps a small vanguard of watch in critical positions. Voss's jaw tightened. Or perhaps you lack confidence in our line troops. A hush fell. Major Dan set her goblet down with authority. Enough. Des' plan is sound. We'll integrate both militia and watch. Now, to other matters. She laid a hand on Voss's arm. We settle disputes in the council chambers, not the banquet hall. Voss inclined his head but scowled as he returned to his seat. Des exhaled, heart thudding. Politics were another battlefield. He steered the conversation back to logistics, and the feast resumed under brighter skies. The following morning broke crisp and clear. Under Vale's guidance, 200 workers fanned out along Gamma Ravine's entrance, sinking camouflaged pits laced with sharpened stakes. Engineers taught watchmen to reset pit covers, crossbow crews practiced volley drills, cavalry hoofbeats sounded on the ridge. Des measured each stake cluster, ensuring no gap exceeded 3 paces, and tested soil compaction until no hollow echo vibrated beneath his punch. Midday he mounted atop Overlook Tower's parapet, telescope in hand, scanning the western horizon. A plume of dust rose in the distance, likely a scouting party. Des traced the rider's formation through his replay gift, 5 scouts riding abreast, hovering 300 paces from Gamma's entrance. He signaled Dare, the tower's harquebusier, to alert the garrison by miracle. Down in the ravine's mouth, the militia snapped to readiness. Crossbowmen loaded bolts, cavalry formed wedge formations. Des' heart pounded. His pattern was unfolding in real time. He watched as the scouts spurred forward, drawing close to the pit line. At the precise moment, a volley of bolts cut across the approach, forcing the scouts to wheel back straight into the first trap. Horses fell, riders tumbled into the pits, hidden infantry rose to finish the job. Des felt the familiar rush of clarity, pattern recognition made flat. The second tier awaited, and when Raider war horns sounded, the main column swept forward, only to shatter against stakes and crossbows. The valley echoed with battle cries and the crack of armor. Des directed the cavalry to charge the flanks at Delta Pass, but always his mind circled back to the next trap line, the next crossbow stand, the next signal flare. By dusk, the ravine lay silent. Captured raiders lay bound. Horses groaned in pain. Des climbed down, boots stained with mud and blood. Captain Favre and Major Dan approached, faces grave but triumphant. Remarkable, Favre said. Never have I seen a trap network executed so cleanly. Dan nodded. Your traps and tactics saved half our garrison from a full-scale assault. We owe you our lives. Des's voice was quiet. I simply followed the pattern. He offered his quill-stained hand. What comes next? Favre clasped it. The War Council summons us. News of invasion on the southern border. We march at dawn. Maron arrived then, bearing a sealed dispatch. The Emperor calls for your presence. Calder, he's heard of your name. Des took the scroll, its wax seal bearing the imperial gryph. His pulse quickened at its weight. He had begun as a clerk deciphering forgeries. Now he was a master of frontier defense, a strategist whose traps routed enemy hordes. Tomorrow he would stand before the highest council in the empire. Patterns would give way to grand strategy campaign maps across continents, the dance of armies and fleets. That night, in his tent lit by a single lantern, Des unfolded the imperial scroll. He read the summons and invitation to join the Emperor's High War Council as tactical advisor. The weight of those words settled over him. He considered his quill, now crooked and stained, and the ledger that had sparked everything. He had seen patterns where others saw chaos. He had forged defenses in earth and sweat. Now, at the Empire's heart, new patterns awaited his deciphering. Alliances, grand tactics, political intrigues on a scale he had never imagined. He rolled up the scroll and tucked it into his breast pocket. The night air was cool as he stepped outside. Bonfires flickered in the camp, soldiers tending horses and cleaning arms. Beyond lay the silent lines of trap-staked ravines, the steel stakes glinting in torchlight. He looked at the mountains on the horizon, where tomorrow he would find new frontiers, new threats, new patterns. Each carried the promise of discovery and danger. Des Calder inhaled deeply. The horizon beckoned. He squared his shoulders, adjusted his cloak, and prepared to walk the path he had forged from ledger clerk to imperial tactician, knowing that every step would demand the sharpest eye, the quickest mind, and the unerring instinct of the decipherer. A week later, the imperial carriage rolled through the gates of Amerion, capital of the Empire, beneath banners of black griffins on a field of silver. Des Calder sat between Captain Meron and Lieutenant Vel, cloaked against the chill of early morning, his satchel of parchments resting at his feet. The city's spired skyline rose ahead, ivory towers, gilded domes, and the great hall of War Council, whose colonnades gleamed like polished marble. Meron leaned close. Remember, Calder, here politics is as deadly as any battlefield. Your traps impress the frontier lords, but here you'll face whispers in gilded chambers. Des nodded, chest tight with anticipation. He felt the weight of the imperial summons in his pocket, the scroll's wax seal still intact. He had been chosen as tactical advisor, a clerk-turned-strategist at the council's invitation. The journey ahead would test not only his gift for pattern, but his skill at navigating court intrigue. The carriage passed over the River Elwyn by the stone bridge, where fishermen launched early skiffs. Crowds lined the banks, curious to glimpse the newcomers. A ragged company led by a man whose reputation preceded him in whispered rumor. Des bowed to onlookers, mind flicking through his living replay, the echo of market cries, the murmur of gossip, the cadence of oars dipping in water. He traced each sound to its source, committing the riverbank's pattern to memory. At the palace gates, sentries of gleaming steel and plumed helmets saluted the imperial standard. Vel and Meron disembarked to handle introductions. Des followed, stepping onto polished flagstones that echoed beneath his boots. Courtiers in crimson and gold robes swept past, some pausing to examine him with polite curiosity, others offering curt bows. They were escorted through a series of antechambers, each more lavish than the last. Halls hung with tapestries depicting the Empire's founding wars, chambers lined with statuary of past emperors, corridors repainted each decade in subtle shades of cobalt and pearl. Des's eyes darted along the walls, noting hidden doorways and alcoves that might serve as private passages or eavesdropping spots. His mind catalogued every crevice, every carved cornice, every guard's posted angle. At last, they entered the War Council chamber. A vaulted dome soared overhead, frescoed with constellations and armies arrayed under the twin moons. A long horseshoe-shaped table filled the center, carved from single slabs of black onyx, inlaid with silver runes. Around it stood the Empire's most powerful voices, marshals in gilded armor, archmages in starlight-weave robes, and ambassador generals whose jeweled sashes marked their authority. Des's pulse quickened. At the table's apex sat the Emperor himself, Emmanuel de Fath, bronzed by years of campaign, visage stern but curious. He rose as Des approached, draped in wolf fur mantle and bearing a jeweled sword, his one hand etched with scars of old battles extended in welcome. Des Calder, the Emperor said, voice resonant as struck bronze, we have heard of your feats at Wolf's Gorge and Cliffhaven. Your design saved frontier towns and stemmed the raider tide. We welcome you to our council. Des bowed deeply. Your Majesty, I am honored beyond words. I will serve with all the clarity and loyalty my gift affords. The Emperor inclined his head. Your gift is valued here. Come, sit here between Marshal Evelyn of the Silver Legion and Archmage Sorin of the Eastern Tower. Our discussion begins with the unrest in the southern province. Des took his seat on a cushioned onyx chair, the weight of every eye upon him. He placed the imperial scroll before him, sealed instructions from the Emperor's hand, and unrolled his own dossier on Cliffhaven's defense. Monitors lit beneath the chamber's high windows revealed live feeds of frontier outposts, flickering on crystal panels, a modern marvel of the military arcane alliance. Candles guttered around the table, but the room felt alive with unseen currents of power. The first matter was news of uprisings in the Sunvale tenant revolts, driven by famine and drought. veteran generals called for punitive expeditions. Archmage Sorin warned of battlefield wards collapsing under heat. The council bickered over costs and strategy. Des listened, mind replaying past campaigns that faltered under similar conditions. He noted the pattern: punitive force alone only deepened resentment. A combined approach might quell unrest more effectively. When a lull opened, he cleared his throat. "If I may, Your Majesty," he began. Murmurs rippled. He unrolled a small map of the Sunvale's trade routes and irrigation canals. Experience along the northern frontier shows that targeted supply convoys escorted by militia can break the cycle of famine, while limited strategic ambushes can neutralize raider bands with minimal collateral. I propose a dual operation. Open relief routes secured by mobile trap detachments, much like Wolf's Gorge, combined with water diversion works to stabilize the drought. The room fell silent as military lords exchanged looks. Marshal Aveline leaned forward, silver armor glinting. A logistics defense. Interesting. She tapped a leather gauntlet. We can deploy 3 legions to escort convoys, while engineers under Dessa's guidance establish sluice gates along the Dry Run River. But we must also clear outlaw bands in the eastern passes. Archmage Sorin frowned. Do you suggest traps in populated areas? He raised one eyebrow. Magic could maintain water flow with less disruption. Dessus shook his head respectfully. The engineer's sluice gates, combined with battlefield wards and enchanted runes on gates, can work in tandem. Traps are limited to unpopulated mountain passes, used only if the outlaws attempt interception. Emperor Emanel steepled his fingers. A balanced solution. We will combine relief, traps, and warding spell. Des Calder, you will coordinate with the quartermaster and the grand engineer on this operation. Report your final plan by week's end. Des bowed. It will be done, Your Majesty. He felt a surge of exhilaration, his pattern logic and battlefield traps scaling to imperial policy. He glanced around the table, noting the subtle nods of approval and the guarded frowns of those skeptical of a former clerk guiding strategy. Yet here he was, shaping the fate of province. The council shifted to the next topic. Piracy along the Sapphire Coast. But Des tracked only the final echoes. He sketched notes on the back of his dossier. Sunvale relief convoys routes, schedules, trap passes. Engineer Ward Liaz, he glimpsed the deer-hooved ledger of previous campaigns, recalled his replay of ambushes. Each new crisis followed patterns he could decode. Afterward he was escorted to the Chamber of Secrets, a smaller council room for classified matter. Here he reviewed intelligence on rumored necromantic stirrings in the borderlands, demonic cults in the smoldering isles, and reports of a ghostly legion marching through old battlefields. Each file he opened, his gift replaying the half-caught whispers, the echoes of hoofbeats, the static of arcane detection wards. He catalogued anomalies in each report, marking potential threats. That evening, he dined privately with the Grand Engineer, Adric Velit. They pored over engineering blueprints of frontier forts, discussing soil compositions, timber availability, and the optimal materials for concealment camouflage. Des contributed notes on trap frame durability under arid conditions, and Adric provided arcane-treated steel for root ensnaring stakes. By night's end, they had drafted a supply requisition for 1,000 stake kits, reinforced palisade segments, and a special order of magically honed crossbow bolts. When Des returned to his chambers and the High Watch keep, he found Bale waiting. Your talent is in high demand, she said with a wry smile. Shall we toast your first day as council advisor? He set aside the last engineering scroll and joined her at the small table. Bale poured wine into 2 crystal goblets, an aged red that tasted of blackberries and oak. Des sipped and let the flavors ground him. You did well, Bale said softly, but the court is full of more subtle battles. Watch your back. Des nodded, swirling the wine. For now I need rest. Tomorrow we ride to the Sunvale reconnaissance camp. The operation begins at first light. Vale raised her goblet to patterns and possibilities. They drank outside. The capital's night wind whispered through shuttered windows, carrying the faint echo of distant bell. Des set the goblet down and gazed at his reflection in the glass. Dark circles beneath his eyes, his cheekbones sharpened by the day's stress, the quill tucked behind his ear like a war standard. He ran a hand through his hair, mind already racing ahead to supply chains, reconnaissance reports, and trap calibrations. He lay on the narrow cot, evening breeze through the window cool on his face. As he drifted toward sleep, his gifts stirred once more. He saw the faint outline of the royal seal on tomorrow's orders, felt the murmur of imperial ambition beneath the council chamber, heard the ghostly echo of the Sunvale's starving fields calling for relief. Each detail formed a constellation of frets and solutions, and in that tapestry of possibilities, Decipherer the Decipherer prepared to shape destiny anew. The ledger's patterns had brought him here. Now, mapped across provinces and battlefronts, those patterns would determine the fate of the empire itself. He closed his eyes, mind alight with strategy, ready to rise again with dawn. Dawn's first light crested over the sun-veil's parched fields as Decipherer's escort rode into the outpost of Harvest Watch. Dust from the long road clung to their cloaks. The air smelled of cracked earth and dying grass. Ahead lay the relief convoy camp, a cluster of tents pitched around a half-filled river basin. Engineers labored at partial sluice gates while militia unloaded crates of grain and barrels of water. Des dismounted, boots sinking into dry soil. He adjusted his satchel of maps and notes, then approached the central tent where Major Alaradan awaited. The dusk-dried veteran offered a curt nod. "Good, you're here. Governor Helibert wants your plan before we break ground on the new canal." Des unfolded his topographical chart on a folding table carved into a stump. Around them, clerks recorded ration counts, while laborers tested soil samples. Des traced the river's course with a finger. "We'll need 3 diversion channels upstream," he explained, voice steady. "Each must be anchored by sluice gates tuned to release water gradually. That prevents flooding the valley floor. I recommend reinforcing the banks with bundled reed mats treated with lime mortar. The soil here is loam heavy. Without reinforcement, the channels will collapse." Major Dan studied the diagram. "And our manpower? Engineers are thin on the ground." Des tapped margin notes. "We use local labor peasants as overseers, 2 per gate under militia guard. They'll build each channel in stages, first trench, then brace, then lining. I've sketched out a timetable. Gate 1 operational in 4 days, Gate 2 in 6, Gate 3 in 8. A messenger sprinted in, panting. Lord Governor approaches with his council. Des rolled his chart. "Governor Helibert," he said, rising. They walked to a stone platform where the sun-blinded governor and 3 councilors awaited a merchant lord, a tax collector and the military advisor overseeing supply convoys. Helibert's paunch and dusty robes spoke of wealth, but also of worry etched across his brow. "We are grateful for your presence, Mr. Calder," Helibert began. "Our people starve. If this canal fails, the Vale will collapse." Des inclined his head. "Governor, we secure supply routes first. I've arranged a convoy plan. Supply wagons will travel under militia escort along 2 parallel roads. Each road intersects with trap-cleared passes, Trap Zone Alpha and Beta, where static ambushes deter raiders. At midpoints we host rest stations with medical aid." The merchant lord interjected. "But raiders could strike the convoys directly." "No, your traps at the gorge worked in narrow defiles. Here, roads are open fields." Des nodded. "True, that's why Traps Alpha and Beta must be augmented with mobile patrol. I've scheduled rotating squads on disguised mounts that shadow the convoy. If raiders appear, they engage in hit-and-run tactics until the militia lines close in. We also embed lookouts in harvested wheat fields, using temporary blinds to conceal their watch." The tax collector frowned. "This costs coin double tunnels for water, militia wages, patrol mounts. Where does the treasury find funds?" Des met the governor's eyes. "From seized raiders' spoils, grain and livestock, plus the War Council's emergency relief fund. I've written requisition requests to the High Council in Ameria. They arrive by courier within 2 days." Helibert exhaled. "Very well, Mill, do your work." He turned to his advisor. "Set up the supply staging ground. Council, depart." The group dispersed, leaving Des and Dan alone as shade drifted across the plain. Major Dan clapped him on the shoulder. "We have 4 days. I'll move out the first convoy at dawn tomorrow. Are your maps ready?" Des checked his satchel. "Every route detail. I'll lead the first patrol personally." That evening, Des walked the top of the riverbank embankment. A thin trench had been dug for Gate 1, stakes marking future anchor points. He carried a small trowel and pried at the soil, feeling its grain with calloused fingers. He closed his eyes and replayed his soil tests. Moisture levels, compaction, pH balance, root density. With mental precision, he estimated the volume of reinforced mats needed to hold the walls. Satisfied, he set sample stakes at 3-foot interval. He marked each with chalk for the engineers to follow. At the head of the trench he drew a quick sketch on a scrap of parchment. The angle of cut, the angle of brace, drainage channels beneath the sluice block. He folded the parchment into his coat, for reference at first light. A sudden rustle of hooves sounded behind him. Des turned, lantern raised. A lone rider cloaked in deep green approached on a white mare. The rider reined in and dismounted with practiced agility. revealing a lean figure whose sharp features were hidden beneath a hood. A glint of steel at his belt betrayed quality arms. "Decipherer," the rider said, voice low, accent unfamiliar. "I have a message from the Iron Council." He handed Desh a sealed letter embossed with the Council's iron claw sigil. Desh examined the seal. "This is unexpected." The Iron Council moved swiftly. He broke the letter's binding and read a terse line. "Your relief operation threatens our eastern caravans. Cease or we intervene." He looked up. "They demand I stop, or they'll send agents to sabotage the canals." The rider watched him. "They believe you plan to divert trade routes. They must think you ignorant of their interests. Perhaps they fear your pattern too much," Desh said quietly. He refolded the letter. "I'll draft a diplomatic reply, explain the Council's grants and the dire need. For now, I must inform Governor Helibert." The rider inclined his head. "Be swift. They've already sent one saboteur to try burning the construction site." He mounted and rode off into the twilight. Desh watched him vanish, then turned back to the trench. The stakes he placed now were no longer just for raider traps, but also to mark where saboteurs might strike. He laid new instructions beneath each marker: patrol paths for militia, guard rotations, escape hatches in case of fire. His mind raced through all possible sabotage: acid on wooden braces, false scaffolding built too weakly, oil slicks under lime. He inscribed defensive runes on oak beams stored nearby. Weak enchantments learned from Castle Blackstone's archives, enough to deter a casual arsonist. By the time he returned to camp, moonlight blanketed the field. Vale waited by his tent. "Any trouble?" she asked. Desh shook his head. "Sabotage letter from the Iron Council. They think our canals will divert trade. I've secured the site with basic wards and trap posts. We're ready for them, or anyone else who comes." He handed Vale the sealed letter. She smirked. "Trade war, not tavern brawl. Today never ends." She patted his arm. "Get some rest. You'll need your eyes at dawn." At first light, Desh led the convoy's vanguard out from Harvest Walk. 20 wagons creaked under grain sacks. 30 militia in scarlet tunics brushed armor. 6 mounted patrols in civilian cloaks hovered at convoy flanks. The dual roads, East Lane and West Lane, glinted pale in morning haze. Desh and Vale rode atop a lead wagon painted with the Empire's Gryphon crest. He consulted his map. The first 30 miles were open fields, then a series of low hills ending at Mosswood Ravine. Ahead, beyond the hills, lay the canal waterwork. Raiding bands had plagued local merchants along this road for years. No more. As the convoy passed farmland, farmers waved, grateful for relief. Desh nodded, eyes scanning field patterns, windrows, irrigation ditches, hedgerows offering cover to ambushers. He noted a silent ridge of pollarded trees 200 paces to the convoy's east that matched his map's watchpoint, Echo 3. He signaled Vale by tapping her gauntlet. She nodded and sent a mounted patrol to occupy the tree line. 2 hours later, they reached the ravine's mouth. Desh halted the convoy just beyond Trap Zone Alpha's hidden pits. He dismounted and inspected the pit covers, each partially covered by loose earth. He knelt to test one, stepping gingerly. The cover held. He checked another, solid. He turned to his sub-commander. "Alpha is live. Deploy militia checkpoints here. Here and here." He pointed to 3 stakes marked in white chalk. Vale marshaled the militia. They fanned out, bracing for ambush. Desh took position by a concealed crossbow nest raised on a lobe. He allowed himself a brief moment of calm, recalling his replay of raider scouts probing the ravine in past seasons. He recognized the approaching hoofbeats, a loose column of light cavalry, their banners clipped of bright colors to avoid detection. They moved with casual gait, nothing suspicious. Then a sharp whistle from the militia. Desh's heart jumped. He heard hoof thuds accelerate. He sighted his crossbow. A rider spurred hard, galloping straight over the first pit line. The dirt gave way. The horse reared and toppled. The rider slammed to the ground. Another rider skidded to a halt, drawing a short spear. Desh loosed his bolt, striking the second rider's shield. A volley from his men followed. Panic spread through the raider detachment. The remaining riders veered, but only to encounter the second trap line. Tripwire, triggered nets and flame pots that erupted along the path. Smoke and shouting echoed through the ravine. Major Dan led the cavalry from Hill Echo down the slope in a wedge formation. Their charge broke the raider center. Desh watched as disorganized fighters were cut down by disciplined soldiers. A dozen raiders surrendered, the rest fled into the hills. By midday, the convoy moved on, riders at full guard around the wagon. They passed the canal work site. Gate 1 sluice gates partially open, water trickling into the first diversion. Engineers cheered when Desh and Vale arrived, pointing to the reinforced banks that held perfectly beaver-like. The water filled a shallow trench for measuring, then funneled into a new branch toward dying orchards. Des surveyed the flow. Perfect volume, no spillover. He approached the lead engineer. Good work. Close the trench gates at 1700 hours. Test gate 2 tomorrow and ensure guard rotations every 4 hours. The engineer, a stocky woman named Halray, nodded. Ready, Mr. Calder. We'll beat the heat tomorrow. Desch allowed himself a smile. The field operation was on schedule. Board by board, stake by stake, canal by canal, he was reshaping the fate of the Sun Vale. Yet in the back of his mind lingered the threat from the Iron Council, rumors of necromantic stirrings, the pressure of the Emperor's expectations. At sunset, he returned to Harvest Watch under Vale's escort. The camp glowed with lantern-lit activity. Rations distributed, sentinel schedules posted, engineering logs updated. Desch paused at the sluice gates, listening to the gentle rush of water and the distant call of harvest birds returning to roost. His mind replayed the day's events: convoy defense, trap activations, canal progress, a living tapestry of patterns he had woven together. He wrote a brief report: convoy intact, raider losses at 13, no militia casualties, Gate 1 operations nominal, Gate 2 ready at dawn. He sealed it with his signet ring and handed it to Vale. She clipped it to the dispatch rider's mount. This'll reach Marion before the next council meeting, she said. He watched the rider depart, silhouette flitting against the twilight sky. Tomorrow, he would oversee Gate 2 and the final supply run. Beyond that lay Trap Zone Beta on the Western Road, and then the Grand Council of Marion would call upon him again. Each assignment tested his gift for pattern, his trap designs, his engineering acumen, and every success only wove him deeper into the Empire's power structures. As moonlight bathed the camp, Desch climbed onto a low embankment overlooking the trenches, lantern swinging at his side. He gazed at the sluice gates, then at the convoy's tents. A figure approached quietly, Lieutenant Vale, leaning on her spear. Mind if I join you? She asked. Desch nodded. Of course. They stood shoulder to shoulder, watching the waters shimmer in the glimmer of campfires. Vale broke the silence. You did well today. The governors told me you saved nearly half the convoy before it even reached the first gate. Desch exhaled. We follow pattern. Raiding parties always probe at dawn, charge at midday, disperse by afternoon heat. He traced an invisible line across the gorge. If we'd waited until night, they'd have slipped through shadows. Timing was everything. Vale smiled. You're more than a clerk, Des Calder. You're a strategist of Empire. Des met her gaze. I never wanted the title. I wanted to get the work right. Vale's spear tip tapped the embankment rock. Right's good enough for me. Rest now. Gate 2 awaits you at first light. Des nodded, turning back to the sluice gates. Water shimmered in crescent reflections. Beneath the earth held the promise of renewed orchards, saved villages, and a stable empire. He closed his eyes, replaying the rush of horses, the crack of crossbows, the rumble of water, each pattern a step towards something greater. Tomorrow, more patterns would emerge. Desert marsh saboteurs, pirate bands at sea, necromantic cults rising in the borderlands. But tonight, in the quiet between campaigns, Des Calder, the Decipherer, rested, ready to rise with the dawn and read the next map of destiny. The first light of day found Des Calder standing beside Gate 2's partially constructed sluice in the Sun Vale diversion network. The trench's damp earth glistened as he tested the newly installed reed-matted banks, while a dozen peasants labored under Major Dan's direction to widen the channel and secure the gates. Soldiers patrolled the perimeter, crossbows at rest, but eyes alert for unseen threat. Des crouched at the water's edge, hand dipping into the cool stream that would soon supply half the valley's villages. He closed his eyes and summoned his living replay, picturing the river's previous dry years, the cracked beds he had seen on horizon rides, and the distant memory of tidal flows he had studied in old texts. This water would return life to orchards, fill cisterns, and carry hope. His gift let him feel every drop's path, every possible leak or breach, every stress point where the banks might fail. From behind, Vale's voice startled him. Ready for the test run? She held up a wax-sealed keg of greenstone oil. The sabotage agent from the Iron Council's let. We found this dumped at Gate 1 last night. Someone tried to light the banks on fire. Des frowned and examined the sealed keg. He cracked it open and sniffed the residue. A faint tang of peppered smoke and ember ash. They intended to burn the embankment. If the reeds caught, the sluice gates would collapse and flood the trenches, destroy the work and drown nearby villages. He pocketed the empty keg. We can't leave the banks exposed. We'll treat them with a fire-retardant lime slurry nightly until the diversion channels are complete. Vale nodded. I've doubled the guard at Gate 1. We'll rotate patrols every 2 hours. Des pressed on the reed mats again. With this to guide us, I'm confident Gate 2's banks will hold. He signaled the engineers to pour a batch of lime slurry on the upstream banks, while he and Vale walked the palisade line. They paused at a guard post near Gate 1, where Militia Sergeant Caro knelt beside a burnt patch of reed. He showed Vale a half-burnt splint, taken from the keg, branded with the Iron Council's claw sigil. Vale's jaw tensed. They sent one operative last night. I want 3 tonight, and search everyone with council correspondence. Des watched as Vale curtly dismissed Caro. Attention flickered in Vale's eyes. Betrayal by the Empire's own council cut deeper than raiders. He steadied his voice. We'll uncover them. In the meantime, I'll write to the governor about increased patrols along the western flank. He scribbled a quick note on a scrap of parchment, detailing guard rotations, investigations at Gate 1, and sampling of every empty oil keg found. As Vale moved on, Des lingered at the sloop. He withdrew his quill and annotated his trench sketches. Gate 1 fire retardant required. Investigate Iron Council supply lines. Monitor Gate 2 for similar sabotage. Each note mapped an emerging pattern. A council intent on undermining his effort. He tucked the notes into his satchel and climbed the embankment to oversee Gate 2's workers. By midday, the division of labor was seamless. Engineers completed the last bracework on Gate 2's banks. Militia squads under Vale's command guarded the diversion channels. Cart drivers lined up to haul gravel and timbers, while caravan guards swept the roads for council spies. Des moved among them, adjusting a stake here, deepening a trench there, all recorded in his margin notes. In the distance, a rider's clarion call echoed from the east. Des looked up. A lone courier dashed toward them, banners of the Imperial Messenger Service on his cloak. He fought through dust, dismounted, and thrust a sealed scroll into Des's hand. The courier panted, lifted his visor, then vanished as quickly as he had arrived. Des broke the seal and read the terse message. Spectre Legion sighted in the borderland. Grand Engineer Adric Vader requests immediate advisory presence. Supreme Command orders your departure within 24 hours. Additional details to follow and wrote. Vale arrived then, scanning the dispatch, undead specters and the borderlands. She murmured, they can't mean the old battlefields. Those have been clear for decades. Des's mind raced. His margin notes of necromantic disturbances in Amrian had been theoretical warnings, now they surfaced as urgent reality. He folded the scroll. I must depart at once. I'll send your report on Gate 1 sabotage with the next courier. Vale's expression was grim. I'll oversee final works here. You have my gratitude, and my trust. Return safely, Calder. Des nodded. The weight of 2 fronts settled over him. The sun Vale's fragile salvation, and the looming specter threat in the borderlands. He rallied the engineers for final instructions to stand the gates until his courier returned, then prepared his own departure. He gathered his quills, parchments, and ledger, stowed them in his satchel, and mounted his horse. Vale handed him a satchel of fast travel maps and sealed orders from Governor Helibert, confirming his convoy commutation. Des saluted. I'll return soon with solutions for your sabotage and waterworks. She nodded. Safe travels. Decipher. That afternoon, Des rode east along the high road toward the borderland. Beyond the sun Vale's golden fields lay the desolate borderland plains, pastures now abandoned, watchtowers fallen, roads choked with brambles. His escort was a single armored squire carrying his baggage and a pair of wildwood archers assigned for reconnaissance. He instinctively cataloged the terrain's patterns. The curve of a dried riverbed, a cluster of blackened stones, where last week's rebel camp still smoldered. A solitary windmill turned broken blades in the breeze. As they passed a ruined watchtower, Dash halted and dismounted. He examined the stone base, noting deep claw marks in the plaster, signs of large beasts or animated constructs. He closed his eyes, letting his replay gift reconstruct the final moments. A horde of villagers fleeing, footsteps scuffing stones, an unnatural roar like metal scraping bone. He cataloged the impressions. No animal tracks. Voices distorted as if through a spell. A moment of cold stillness before the attack scattered all. He opened his eyes to the squire's puzzled gaze. Specters move in shapes and sounds. Desh said softly. This tower saw them last night. We should make camp here to record details, patterns of approach for the Grand Engineer. The squire dismounted, nodding. They set camp within the tower's shell. Dash retired to a blanket underneath the broken clockwork of the old roof. He scribbled notes. Claw marks at 4 o'clock height. Approach from north wind. Auditory distortion radius 30 paces. He lit a small lantern of soul glass for clearer observation. As dusk fell, Dash rubbed the lamp's glass to clarity and climbed the tower step. From the parapet he scanned the plain. On the far horizon, he saw an unnatural glow, flickering torches in formation, marching toward them. The wildwood archers readied bows. The squire alerted the watch. Death's pulse hammered. Spectre. He stood plotting the Spectre's attack pattern. They marched in columns of 20, spaced 15 paces apart, horns of bone blasting discordant notes. He estimated their advance rate 70 strides per minute. He signaled the archers to load spectral rune arrows, an experimental blend of ash and enchanted oil that disrupted Ghost's cohesion. He called to his squire, prepare tripwire nets in the corridor below. 2 lines triggers at 15 pace interval. When they pass under, we trigger the nets and follow with spectral rune volleys. He drew quick sketches on a scrap of paper and dashed them downstairs. Within minutes, nets bristled across the tower's lower entry. Archers took station at upper window. Des tuned his crossbow, a heavy bolt chamber loaded with a spectral rune head. He pressed the rune-inked panels on the lantern to animate its pulse, setting a faint azure glow. At the horn's toll, marching specters appeared, pale forms drifting across the plain, their hollow eyes fixed on the tower. They advanced, passing the first tripwire, steel nets snapped upward, ensnaring the first dozen wraiths. A howl like metal ripping filled the air. Death's fired. Bolts flew in patterned bursts, 2 at first, then 3, then volleys, as the specters recoiled, bodies flickering. Those within nets writhed as spectral fires ignited on rune bolts. Specters shattered, their shrieks pierced the night. The remaining column wavered, then surged forward again. Des fired again, adjusting his aim by replaying their reaction patterns. Twice more he loosed bolts, watching each wraith collapse into motes of shimmering ash. When at last silence returned, Des exhaled, heart pounding. Beneath him lay remnants of ghost fire in nets, half-formed wraith echoes dissolving in the wind. He descended, passing the archers who looked on in awe. Your design worked, one whispered. Des knelt among the nets. It held until the spectral volley. Good work. He patted the net. Collect these remnants. They contain ectoplasmic residue. We can refine the rune composition. He scribbled new margin notes. Trap efficiency 95%, net durability threshold, recommended rune refills. The next morning Des led his entourage past the broken tower, deeper into the borderland. The road narrowed into single-track trail carved through bramble. At midday they reached Cavern Pass, where the mountain's basalt face split open like a maw. A single guard shack marked the entrance. Inside, 2 borderland rangers eyed Des warily. Des approached and explained his mission, to assist the Grand Engineer and survey Spectre activity. The rangers traded glances, then stepped aside. Few get permission, one said. Spectres plague these parts at night. They see near the old battlefields. Des nodded. Then we'll record each encounter, map their patrols and set up patterns of wards and traps, just as we did for raiders. He handed them his credentials and the Emperor's scroll. They saluted and let him pass into the dark tunnel. Torches flickered on the wall. Des led his small party through winding passages, his replay gift mapping the stable sections versus collapse-prone arches. He noted air currents, faint whispers echoing from side tunnels and the occasional runic ward worn by time. At the cavern's end, they emerged into the abyssal hollow's outer chamber, a vast hall whose walls glowed with veins of magma-heated quartz. Giant statues of ancient heroes loomed, their stone eyes cracked. A river of steam hissed through fissures in the ground. Engineers had laid red sand dust in concentric rings, preliminary wards to slow Spectre advance. Grand Engineer Edric Valen awaited them at the center, robes tucked into aristocratic boots. He offered Des a curt nod. You came quickly, we need your expertise. Spectres broke 2 ward circles last night, passive wards designed to hold them at bay. He waved a hand. Here, he pointed to 4 half-melted ward pillars, carved with runes. The runes glowed weakly, flickering under the Spectre's assaults. Des knelt, examining the pillar. He traced a finger along the runes, and closed his eyes to replay the moment the pillars collapsed, subtle hum of suppressed power, the tingle of necromantic force surging through bones in the earth. The moment the mage's chant broke cadence, he heard as if whispered in his ear, the Spectre's cries of conquest. He opened his eyes. The runes are sound, but the power source was overloaded. The pillar's cores may need a secondary buffer, stabilizer wards to absorb the first pulse before the main ward engages. He sketched on a scrap, a config layering salt brine veins around the pillar bases, with a secondary circle of ash-infused glyphs. Valen watched. Interesting. And where do you place these buffers? Des pointed to the fissure alignment. At each cardinal point, north, south, east, west, 300 paces from the pillar, place salt trenches 2 feet deep, embed silver-threaded boards for conduit, then inscribe ash glyphs on the trench floor. If Spectres advance, the salt will bind their will briefly. The conduits will channel surges to the buffer runes, and the main ward remains intact. Valen nodded, snapping his fingers. We'll build them today. We need to hold this place for our research. Without these wards, the specters will overrun us. I've already lost 2 mages and half a dozen laborers. He shook his head. Your pattern insight is invaluable. Des rose, folding his notes. I'll oversee buffer installation. Then we need to patrol that east corridor where most breaches occurred. I'll set up runic nets and spectral rune traps similar to the tower's design. He outlined a plan on the cavern floor with chalk trap lines, patrol routes, buffer trench. Valen gripped his arm. Excellent. We'll combine your traps with elemental ward totems I've prepared, signs from ice forges and lightning flares. Together we'll hold the hollow. Des nodded. We'll need a rotating watch. Spells only hold for an hour. The traps give us breathing space. They spent the day ordering squads of engineers and rangers to dig trenches, embed silver boards, carve ashglyphs, erect elemental totems, and unfurl spectral runic nets. Des marked every stage in his margin notes. Trench depth, rune orientation, material compaction, guard rotation schedules. At dusk, the 4 buffer trenches glowed faintly in phased torchlight, and elemental totems hummed with latent power. As night descended, Des and a detachment of rangers positioned themselves near the east corridor breach. One ranger knelt to test the salt trench. Another watched the next runic net. Des reloaded his crossbow with spectral rune bolts and settled behind a rock outcrop. In his satchel lay jars of spectral silver oil reserved for emergencies. Midnight chimed from unseen bells when the specters returned. 8 wraiths glided through the cavern's arch, their forms pale and dripping with ethereal glow. One reached a pillar, its runes flared, then flickered under arcane pressure. Des gripped his crossbow and let the wraiths pass the first buffer trench. The salt crackled as ghost limbs brushed the mound, specters shivered, slowed. They passed the second trench. The elemental totems flared in sapphire and white flame. The wraiths recoiled, then surged forward again. Des released a bolt. It struck a phantasmal chest. Spectral flame arced through its form, tearing it apart. Another bolt flew. The wraiths faltered, then collided with the runic nets. Cords animated by Des' glyphs, constricting as they lit with azure runic fire. The wraiths hissed and collapsed into writhing shadows before dissolving into ash. The corridor lay silent. The remaining specters retreated into the deeper cavities. Des exhaled, limbs trembling from the surge of action. The intricate traps and wards had held. The pillars still glowed with power. Rangers emerged, surveying the ruins of nets. Hands shook as they collected nets' remains. Des patted one ranger's shoulder. Well done. Collect residue. This proves our trap design works on a larger scale. They returned to the main hall where Valen awaited, pacing nervously. At the report of victory, relief washed over her features. You did it, she whispered. The hollow is secure for now. Des felt exhaustion seep through him. His gift had guided him from ledger forgeries to frontier traps to canal relief, to spectral siege out. He closed his eyes, summoning the memory threads one last time. The hiss of salt, the crackle of elemental wards, the hum of totems, the shatter of wraiths. Each detail seared into his mind, catalogued for future designs. He sat heavily at a makeshift table, quill poised over new parchment. He recorded the battle buffer efficacy, ward intensities, patrol schedules, supply needs. By dawn he would dispatch his consolidated report to the Emperor's high command. That night, Des slept fitfully, haunted by half-formed echoes of specters and distant thunder. Yet beneath the unrest lay a resolute thread. Each pattern he decoded, each trap he built, reinforced his purpose. He was no longer just a clerk deciphering forged ledgers. He was the Empire's shield and sword, mapping threats, weaving defenses, decoding fate. As first light seeped through the hollow stone arch, Des rose and gathered his notes. Beyond lay the Sapphire Coast's pirate codes, tomes of endless night to master, and the distant towers of Mor-Karath awaiting his infiltration. Each front held its own patterns: waves, sands, sorceries, shadows. For Des Calder the Decipherer, there was no rest until all threats were charted, all traps set, all designs complete. He slung his satchels, strapped his quiver, and walked into the dawn, ready to read the next map of destiny. Des Calder stood at the prow of the Imperial warship Auric Dawn, as it sliced through gray waves toward the ebon marshes. The sky was heavy with low clouds. Wind whipped his cloak around him. Below, the marsh's murky waters rippled with the tide, reeds brushing along the hull like errant fingertips. He clutched the strap of his satchel, the same worn leather that had carried his ledger pages on distant battlefields, through sun-scorched valleys anomalies and within the abyssal chambers of Hollow's Spectre. Behind him, Grand Engineer Edric Velen and Lieutenant Vale discussed construction logistics for the Spire's warded barges. To his side, Captain Muron Clemens checked a small fleet of barges line up, each hull embossed with the Emperor's Gryphon and rigged with Stormward enchantment. Des had designed patterns for the barge's formation, 3 columns deep, each staggered to form overlapping shields of arcane warding, a riverborne phalanx that would ferry troops and siege equipment safely past marshborne hazards. Adric clapped his hand. Load the storm ward crystals into the keel glands. We depart at first light. Vale tapped her gauntlet and spread the anti-swamp fungus along the deck planking. Those waiting swamp lurkers won't breach our defense. Des nodded, scanning the marsh where slender trees yawned in mist and hides glowed faintly at high tide. He knew the patterns of marsh travel, shifting channels, quicksand patches, hidden sinkholes. He had drafted narrow charts, salt-etched on waterproof skins marking safe passages and ambush points. Now the barges would follow his lines, avoiding bogs and snags, using buoyant channels that only slightly rocked under the stormward engines. As dawn broke, Vale gave the signal. Adric's crystals hummed, the barge's runes flared in pale blue, and Auric dawn surged forward. Des oversaw the pattern, marking each barge's relative position. Ahead lay Morkaraf's obsidian cliffs, a jagged spine crowned by a single black obelisk visible even across miles of marsh. That was their target. The Shadow Spire, ancient fortress of void magic rumored to conceal the grimoire of endless night. Hours later, the flotilla neared the cliffs. The marsh narrowed into a twisting channel spanned by basalt pillars carved with impenetrable wards. Des recognized several from the Conclave's archives, runes of containment and equilibrium. He pointed to the largest pillar. That one's the key. Its wards repel arcane intrusion. We berth between pillars 3 and 4, then clear a path through the void glyph corridor. Maron steered to a sheltered dock, an iron-reinforced landing platform built by Valen's engineers. As boats bumped against mooring rings, Des deployed small teams of engineers and militia to secure the landing and erect protective screens of warded canvas. Vale ordered the fungal repellent smeared on every post. Flames from portable burners traced the runes on each canvas, binding them in protective enchantment. Under Vale's command, the squads laid defensive perimeters, tripod ballistae aimed into the channel to guard against ambushes from cliff caverns. Crossbow nests on the barge's decks ready to sweep the riverbanks. Des oversaw the placement, overlaying the militarized landscape onto his mental map of marsh currents and tidal shifts. He radioing the Auric Dawn to maintain station alignment, keep shift vector 2 degrees starboard to counter tidal drift. By midday they were ready. Desh convened the commanders at the edge of the dock, where basalt stairs led up the cliff face. He spread a new parchment on a makeshift table, a cross-section of the Shadow Spire's known architecture, 5 levels of void-warded galleries, each ringed with floating plateaus tethered by basalt bridges, spires of silvered quartz caught in perpetual storm winds. The central chamber atop the summit, where the grimoire lay sealed. He drew over it his infiltration plan, a series of grappling hooks and cord pulley systems to scale the walls, patterns of shadow step pathways synchronized with the storm surges, trap points below each bridge to disable any pursuing guardians. Listen closely, Desh said, voice firm despite the wind. We ascend by 2 teams. Team Alpha led by Captain Muron will breach the east stair via hook and line. Your climb must match the storm gust patterns. At each lull, ascend 50 feet at the surge, brace against the spire. Team Bravo, under Lieutenant Vale and Archmage Soren, will bypass the main gates by shadow step through the ruins at Gate 4, using concealment wards I've prepared. Once on the upper plateau, both teams converge at the central spire door. I'll handle the seal, the Grimoire's ward using the Archivist's key, and Boralia's binding inversion. Timing is critical. Failure to synchronize invites the elemental storm to wreck both teams. Muron nodded, checking gear strapped to his leather harness. Vale adjusted the straps on her shadow weave cloak. Edric handed out storm shards crystals storing the barge's runic energy to power temporary levitation fields in mid-ascent. Archmage Soren studied wind glyphs etched on a silver tablet. We'll be ready, he said, voice echoing like storm ripple. Dash closed the dossier and took a breath. He felt both exhilaration and the pull of unseen dangers. He had orchestrated defenses against raiders, marsh wraiths and specters. Now he would breach the heart of void magic itself. Every pattern would matter. Every misstep could spell doom. The ascent dusk found Team Alpha at the cliff's base. Stormward totems glowed pale as Muron and his veterans clipped grappling hooks to reinforced ledges hidden by overgrowth. Desh stood beside them, lantern in one hand, wind chart in the other. He watched the tidal mist swirl, heard the droning hum of warded crystals. He signaled with a lantern flash. Patterns of 3 bright pulses followed by 2 dim advance. Moran's line grew taut, and the veteran sprang to the first ledge. Dash exhaled, heart thrumming. He checked the line's slack, calculated the tidal drift. He retied a snap fitting, then clambered up himself, every movement precise, every handhold memorized from his replay of ancient siege diagrams. Above, wind roared like living thunder, spray from the marsh rose in icy plume. He found a narrow ledge and braced his shoulder against the granite, unbuckled a storm shard and pressed it to his temple. A pulse of energy vibrated through him, brief levitation support as he bridged a gap too wide for normal grip. He landed softly on the next shelf of basalt, boots finding hidden grooves he had mapped by memory. Team Bravo's signals came next. Vale's whisper runes flickered on his shoulder, indicating they had slipped through Gate 4's ruins undetected. He allowed himself a moment to smile. The plan held. He looked down to see Moran's line tied off. The captain waved. Dash clipped a second storm shard to his belt and continued upward. At each braced tether, he triggered a small ward loop, sigils drawn in ash and silver thread that would hold any pursuing ward sentinel at bay for 30 heartbeats. He visualized the steps, recalling each moment, the initial casting of the wards in Blackstone Citadel, the silence glyph impressed beneath his quill. Each spell had joined his arsenal. Now it served to protect him on the cliff. After 700 feet of climb, the ledges pulled back to reveal the Shadow Spire's lower court, a ring of floating basalt platforms tethered by steel cables etched with dragon glyphs. Lightning arced above, circling the highest court spire like a crown. Dash landed on a platform. The wind's roar dropped to a hum. He touched the basalt cables, etched runes glowed faintly under his touch, reading as containment wards. He hummed a ward disruption verse from Verilia's grimoire, bind to free, free to bind, reveal the path from Storm's own mind. Each panting word peeled back a layer of the containment wards. The cables slackened, drawing him closer to the next platform. He released the storm shard. It pulsed and faded, spent, but he had earned entry. Behind him, Moran greeted the sight of Vale's figure stepping out of shadow from the opposite side platform. She offered a brief nod. Dash raised a hand, synchronized 5 pulses. He tapped a small lantern in coded burst. As their signals matched, the cable's runes shimmered and a bridge of wind-caught mist formed between the 2 ledges. Dash and Moran stepped onto the ephemeral pathway. It dissolved behind them like a born-forged cloud. Team Bravo's next signal glowed on Dash's rune band. Gate breach ready. Vale's voice crackled. Spectre wards active. No guardians in sight. Shorin's incantation behind her had woven a momentary clairvoyance ward, ensuring the chamber below lay unguarded. Dash drew the Archivist's eye orb from his satchel. Silver light drained the runic icons, carved around the court spire's base, revealing a hidden lock pedestal, 5 shallow basins inlaid with elemental seals. Air, fire, water, earth, spirit. Dash retrieved the storm iron ingot, tide gem, crown ash vial, ember root vine shard, and worm spectral shard, each lodged in his belt pouch. One by one he placed them, each igniting its basin with corresponding hue: blue lightning, red gold flame, azure wave, emerald root, silver mist. Moran stood ready with his axe. Vale watched the horizon for reinforcements. Shorin chanted a final binding verse. Dash clasped the Archivist's eye in his palm, and recited the inverted word: dragon's might in storm's embrace. Release the night from time and space. Quell the void's unending breath. Unlock the path that spans through death. The orb glowed white-hot. A blast of void wind blasted from the spire's base, tearing away basalt fragments and revealing a black iron door carved with the Shadow Spire's founding rune. The door swung inward, groaning like a slumbering beast, wakening. Dash stepped forward, lantern held high. He felt the surge of raw magic void pool swirling in every echoing step. He passed under the threshold into the spire's lower gallery, a circular chamber lined with 8 obsidian stills, each inscribed with a fragment of the grimoire's lost verses. He felt the Archivist's hush. No dismissal, only final verification. This was the moment he had prepared. Behind him, Moran locked the door, securing the external wards. Vale placed sentry wards at the entry arcs. Shorin's fingers danced over astral lines radiating from the chamber's center. Dash approached the central dais, an anvil of polished void iron that lay at the chamber's heart. There rested the grimoire of endless night, its cover alive with pulsing shadows, pages bound by living bone and sealing sinew. He knelt and laid the Archivist's eye beside the grimoire. The orb's light seeped into the tome's binding, fracturing the living sinew's veil. Desha consulted the open pages, words of void-binding spells, diagrams of dimensional sigils, instructions for absorbing ghostly energy. He read one incantation aloud, voice clear: From silence born to shadow sworn, let bones of night by speech adorn, leak the flame of endless dread, feed the mind with ghostly thread. As each word fell into place, the grimoire's pages fluttered, revealing a hidden chamber beneath the dais. The stairwell spiraled downward, carved into the earth's black core. Deshach rose, turning to his companions. Below lies the heart chamber, vault of void scrolls. We secure it, extract the grimoire, then vanish. Maron rested a hand on his shoulder. After you decipher, Vale gripped her spear. We clear the route. Soren began a protective chant, and I will ward our passage. Deshach took a deep breath and led the descent into shadow. As winds of void roared after them, the final threshold of the spire opening beneath his feet. Each step pulled him deeper into the Empire's most forbidden secrets. Yet he walked with certainty, every detail a pattern he would decipher, every trap he would invert, every ward he would read. He was Deshach Calder, the Decipherer, and here, at the heart of the Shadow Spire, his greatest test had only just begun. Silent stone walls closed around Deshach Calder as he stepped onto the spiraling staircase that wound downward beneath the Shadow Spire. The torchlight he carried sputtered against the damp air, revealing veins of black quartz in the rough carved walls. Each footfall echoed twice, once in the physical world, once in the void's echo, a soundless ripple of magic that pushed at his mind. He steadied himself, drawing on the archivist's eye's low hum to ground his senses. Captain Muron remained close behind, axe ready in one hand, lantern in the other. Lieutenant Vale brought up the rear with Archmage Soren, whose staff glowed faintly with wards against darkness and necromancy. Their formation was tight. Deshach the front, mapping each step, Muron ready to confront any physical threat. Vale prepared to shield against stealth attacks, Soren primed to unleash arcane barriers or blasts, if needed. They descended 20 paces before the stairs opened onto a broad chamber. Low vaulted arches spanned the space, supported by pillars carved with void runes that glimmered with residual power. In the center lay a circular dais of obsidian inlaid with a single spiral glyph. Embedded in the floor around it were the 5 elemental tokens: the Tide Gem, the Storm Iron Ingot, the Ember Root Vine Shard, the Crown Ash Pouch, and the Spectral Worm's Shard. Beyond the dais, alcoves led off to small side chambers, each sealed by an iron-bound door. Deshach stepped onto the dais. Lantern raised, his mind replayed Virelia's grimoire instructions. To claim the grimoire's final word, he needed to activate the elemental tokens simultaneously and then recite the rite of assimilation. That would open the alcove at the dais's edge, revealing the scroll vault beneath. He knelt and touched the Tide Gem. It pulsed coolly. He slotted the Storm Iron Ingot into its niche. A low electrical hum vibrated through the quartz vein. He placed the Ember Root Vine across a carved groove. The green tendrils glowed faintly and roots etched themselves into the obsidian. He sprinkled the crown ash into its basin, watching loose filaments swirl before settling as ember-like motes. Finally, he laid down the spectral shard. It shimmered as if alive, casting soft light across the glyph. As each token settled, the spiral glyph on the dais lit up in turn. First the Tide Gem's blue, then Storm's white, Ember's green, Crown's red, Spectral silver. The combined radiance formed a ring of elemental light. Deshach rose, lifted the archivist's eye above his head, and spoke in a firm, clear voice the words of assimilation. By water's will, by storm's embrace, by root's anchor, by ash's spark, and by worm's echo, unite the seal. The moment the final word passed his lips, the room trembled. The spiral on the dais dissolved into a vortex of fractal light. The elemental rings surged upward like ribbons, coalescing into a beam that struck the vaulted ceiling. Dust cascaded down. A hidden panel in the dais's rim slid aside with grinding stone. Beneath, a narrow hatch descended into darkness. Marin's lantern revealed a bottomless staircase carved into black stone, winding further into the spire's core. Deshach peered down into the void. Every instinct in his body told him the vault below held both ultimate power and unimaginable risk. He sheathed the archivist's eye in a protective cloth. "Stay alert," he said, turning to his companions. "Beyond this point, traps and guardians may remain active." Vale crouched at the dais's edge, peering into the hatch. "I detect residual wards, perhaps time released, or proximity triggered. Any misstep could seal the hatch again, or worse." Soren nodded, staff raised. "I will maintain a ward of clarity to dispel illusions and maintain our path." Marin's hand drifted to his axe's haft. "Lead on, Desh. We follow your pattern." Deshach swallowed. "All right." He stepped onto the first descending stair, lantern held high. Each step was slick with condensation. His boots rang once against the stone. The others followed in single file, maintaining visual contact. The staircase turned and turned again, before dumping them into a crystal-illuminated chamber. Massive stone wheels lined the walls, gears of an ancient mechanism, teeth interlocking in a pattern too intricate to grasp at a glance. The floor was patterned with spiral runes that intersected at regular intervals. In the center lay a dais much like the one above, only larger and more ornate, carved with scenes of long-forgotten rituals. Mortals offering relics to a void flame, dragons bowing before moonlit kings, skeletal hands reaching for a sealed book. Desh's pulse quickened. He recognized this as the primary trap, a gravity ward room designed to crush intruders who failed to follow the runic path. He crouched and traced the floor's runes with his fingertips, mapping the safe route. Each rune had to be stepped on in sequence, alternating clockwise and counterclockwise, while avoiding the infilling runes that triggered the walls to contract. He closed his eyes and replayed the mechanism's initial activation. The grinding of stone wheels, the hiss of released air, the slow movement of walls. The pattern was precise. 8 safe runes, then a 1-pace gap, then another 8. Timing was critical. He opened his eye. Follow me single file, and step only on the runes I mark. He drew a chalk line linking the correct runes. He placed a luminous moss stone at the first rune. It glowed faintly. Step here and wait for the light to fade, then step to the next moss stone. He pointed to 8 moss stones spaced at 2-pace intervals. Marin was first to step. He placed his boot on the moss stone and paused. The walls around the edge shivered but remained in place. He advanced to the next gelatinous luster. The ward held Des followed carefully, then Vale, then Soren. The rest of the team watched from the hatch above. When Soren stepped onto the 8th moss stone, the walls ground to a halt, and the gears above fell silent. The dais's carvings glowed with approval. Des exhaled a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. That's the last of the traps, he said. Beyond that dais lies the vault door. He led them across the dais to the far wall, where a massive iron door stood framed by twin columns of veined quartz. Each column bore 3 empty sockets, probably for the elemental tokens reinforced above. The door's surface was carved with an epitaph in undersea tongue. Only the unified may enter the steady depths. Only the bound may lift the silent seal. Des produced the archivist's eye once more, and held it before the door. The orb's glow intensified, casting prismatic shards across the carvings. He whispered the inversion verse one final time, tracing the epitaph with his fingers. A soft click emitted from the door's center, and the massive panel slid inward, revealing a narrow corridor lined with black stone. Beyond, a shaft of pale luminescence beckoned. Vale peered inside. I sense nothing but stillness, no wards that I can detect. Soren hovered at the portal, humming a quiet chant through his staff. Void ward residuals dissipate once the grimoire's seal is broken. We must be swift. Des nodded, lantern held aloft. They stepped into the corridor. The passage sloped upward, the walls smooth and silent. Each footstep echoed in short bursts, as though the corridor were reminding them of its existence. After 20 paces, the corridor opened onto a final chamber. The air was thick, charged with latent magic. The floor was polished to a mirror sheen, reflecting the vaulted ceiling's star-patterned constellations carved in white stone. At the chamber's center lay a low pedestal of living obsidian. Resting on it was the grimoire of endless night, its surface quivering like a heartbeat in the dim light. The tome's spine was bound with cordie of void seam. Its cover bore the glyph of morbid infinity. Dark mist drifted around it, pressing at the threshold from which they had come. Des approached the pedestal. Every instinct screamed that this was the moment of reckoning. He had designed traps made of earth, water, storm, root, ash, and bone. Now, he would face the artifact those elements had once contained. He laid his hand on the grimoire's cover. It emitted a low pulse, a resonance that tugged at his soul, whispering ancient promises of power and warnings of oblivion. He steadied his breath, and reached into his satchel for Verilia's grimoire. He opened it to the final page, where the inversion of the original binding ritual lay scrawled in faded silver ink. The ritual required equal parts of mercy and resolve, the willingness to take power only to reshape it, not to enslave. He recited the words clearly, voice echoing in the vaulted chamber, spine of bone and breath of shade, reveal the truths your depths have made. From endless night to dawn's first gleam, unbind the silence, set free our dream. The chamber trembled. The grimoire's cordie dissolved into drifting flares of shadow smoke. The veil of mist parted, revealing the book's pages, each etched with a living script that shimmered in the torchlight. Des lifted the grimoire from the pedestal. It felt impossibly heavy, as though each word weighed a pound. Stillness reigned for the slightest heartbeat. Then the chamber's walls pulsed. The black quartz veins lit up in pale blue lines, tracing arcs through each pillar, triggering a release of stored storm energy that hummed in the air. Sharon's staff flared with protective wards. Vale threw her cloak over her lantern to shield Desh from potential backlash. Veron readied his axe in case the walls reacted violently, but nothing harmed them. The storm energy dissipated into the chamber, absorbed by the broken runes in the floor. The grimoire glowed softly in Desh's arms, its text now tamed, waiting for him to read and harness its secrets. Desh closed the book with reverence and wrapped it carefully in a protective cloth. The weight in his arms was both burden and promise. He turned to his companions, voice calm but urgent. "We have the grimoire. We must retrace our steps and seal this chamber once more. Follow the same path but do not trigger any further trap." The ascent through the trap chamber went smoothly. Runic floors held as long as they retraced Desh's steps precisely. Pillars and gears hummed a farewell. The hatch at the dais closed behind them with a final click. The secret stairway slid shut behind them, sealing the vault of endless night once again. Back at the harbor landing, the barges stood ready under stormward canopies. Adric Velen joined them, staff crackling. "Well done," the engineer said. "We will escort your barges back through the marsh and deliver the vault's secrets to Amerian." Desh nodded, shouldering his satchel of maps and the protected grimoire. "Prepare the barges to sail at first light. I will chart the return path, shallow channels to avoid the marsh mine." Marin and Vel moved to issue orders. Desh lingered at the water's edge, feeling the damp breeze and hearing the distant cry of marsh birds. He thought of every pattern he had decoded. Forged ledgers, trap lines, canal spectre wards, frontier defenses, spire ascent. Now he held within his arms a tome of power that could alter any battlefield or council chamber. He felt the gravity of choice pressing at his mind. He closed his eyes and let his living replay carry him through every trap and ward he had crossed, reinforcing each in memory: the precise length of rope for the grappling hooks, the reaction delay of elemental totems, the activation threshold of spectral roan nets, the timing of wind lulls on basalt ledges, the flare sequence on the dais's token. Each detail was catalogued, ensuring that if he returned to the Shadow Spire one day, no secret would elude him. At sunrise, the Auric Dawn and its supporting flotilla set out across the ebon marshes. Desh stood at the prow, grimoire secured, maps in hand, wind pushing his cloak back. Behind him, the barges cut a silent path through glassy waters. Lieutenant Vel, Grand Engineer Velen, Captain Marinol, stood watch, each lost in their own thoughts of what awaited in Amerian. Desh turned east toward the rising sun, horizon vast and open. The Empire's heart lay beyond the marsh, the high roads to the capital beckoning with promise and peril. He inhaled deeply, savoring the salt and peat air. He felt the pulse of the grimoire against his chest, a reminder of what he now carried, knowledge that could save villages or destroy kingdoms. He closed his eyes and allowed himself a moment of peace before the next challenge. The patterns of fate stretched before him, in endless lines. And Desh Calder, the Decipherer, was ready to chart them all. Desh Calder stepped ashore at Amorian's eastern quay before dawn. The grimoire of endless night strapped to his back beneath its protective wrappings. Fog drifted off the calm river, shrouding marble docks in ghostly haze. The city's high towers, polished white stone and gilded spires loomed beyond the mist, promising safety and intrigue, in equal measure. He took a steadying breath, recalling the cold halls of the Shadow Spire and the pulse of void arcana beneath his fingers. Now, he would bring that power to the Emperor's court. Lieutenant Vel disembarked beside him, cloak drawn tightly against the chill. "Welcome back, Desh," she said quietly. "The streets will be crowded. Everyone wants to see the flotilla return." Desh nodded. "We've a narrow window before word spreads of the grimoire's recovery. We should move quickly." Adric Velen and Captain Maron joined them, followed by a guard detail of Imperial Marines, sworn to secrecy. Their barges slipped away and soon the four walked the wooden causeway under torchlight. Fel touched a concealed rune on her glove, dispelling residual marsh haze. Outside the quays lay a crowd of city watch and curious citizens. The Imperial Herald called their names, but Desh ignored the spectacle. He led the party up the narrow streets toward the Hall of War Council. Every alley echoed with rumors. Some hailed him as savior, others whispered danger. Desh scanned each storefront, each watchtower, each posting of Imperial decrees. His mind catalogued exits and eavesdropping spots even as he ascended wide stairs carved with the Empire's founding chronicle. They entered the council vestibule. A vast domed hall hung with tapestries of past victories and defeats. Sentinels in onyx armor bowed as Adric and Maron presented the sealed courier satchel containing Spectre Ward reports and canal relief logs. Desh carried a second pouch, the scroll of the grimoire's wards and the revised trap schematics for frontier and hollow operations. Lieutenant Vale bore a third evidence of Iron Council sabotage attempts. Within moments they were ushered into the hushed council chamber, where Emperor Amenel IV presided alongside Archmage Selendra, Marshal Aveline, and Ambassador General Corinne Didor. The assembled lords leaned forward, awaiting news. Emperor Amenel's voice filled the hall. "Lord Calder, you return bearing the grimoire of Endless Night. Speak, Decipherer. What have you learned?" Desh stepped forward, unwrapping the grimoire's protective cover and holding it respectfully at his waist. "Your Majesty, the grimoire's arcana is vast, but bound by specific Void Ward principles. I have secured its primary wards within the Archivist's eye, ensuring the tome cannot be accessed by those uninitiated. Its magic can sever seals, bind ghosts, and manipulate dimensional thresholds, tools we can deploy against the Empire's enemies, provided we handle it with restraint." A murmur ran through the council. Marshal Aveline's gauntleted hand tapped the table. "Power over void. It threatens stability. How can we trust this knowledge will not corrupt?" Desh met her gaze evenly. "I proposed, and you approved, a binding council of 6 to oversee the grimoire's use. Each council member holds a shard of the Eye's authority. No single person can access the tome's full power without unanimous consent. This prevents misuse." Selendra inclined her head. "Agreed. We have debated the failsafes. The Archivist's oath binds us all. The grimoire remains within council vaults, accessible only for sanctioned operations." Desh nodded. "Additionally, I recommend establishing a cadre, Order of the Cipher, trained to maintain and update wards across the Empire. We saw in the Borderlands how spectral threats adapt. A mobile contingent of tacticians and engineers can preempt attacks." Corinne Didor raised an eyebrow. "Such a corps would rival existing legions. Funding it poses political risk." Captain Maron intervened. "Funding comes from reclaimed raider spoils and reduced ceaseless warfare on the frontiers. The Sunvale Relief and Shadowspire expedition itself demonstrate how efficient coordination saves resources," Vale added. "And sabotage attempts by the Iron Council only underscore the need for a unified force under Imperial command, one answerable to the War Council alone." The Emperor folded his hands. "Your arguments stand. We shall sanction the Order of the Cipher. Desh Calder as its founding master, you will recruit and train its core members. Make haste." Desh bowed. "It will be done, Your Majesty." The council's business moved on to border skirmishes and magisterial disputes, but Desh's mind already leaned toward practicalities, selecting commanders, issuing recruitment orders, drafting training manuals on trap construction and ward maintenance. He allowed himself a moment to note the council's layout: secret passages behind tapestries, recesses behind columns to safeguard future grimoire movements. After the session, Selendra approached him privately near a secluded alcove. "Your success has earned you many eyes, some friendly, some envious," she cautioned. "Be mindful of those who covet your influence." Desh offered a small smile. "I will. But first I must establish the Order, staffed by engineers, arcanists and tacticians. I have in mind a few candidates. One of Soren's best wardcasters, an engineer from Cliffhaven, and a former smuggler turned spy whose pattern gift rivals my own." Selendra nodded approvingly. "A diverse cadre. We shall convene tomorrow to finalize membership." That evening, Desh dined in solitude at the Imperial Mess with Adric Valen as his silent companion. The granite walls echoed with distant laughter of courtiers, but here they tasted crisp bread and roasted venison in quiet. Desh unrolled his scribbled roster of recruits and criteria: intellectual discipline, combat experience, loyalty oaths, psychological resilience. He annotated each candidate's strengths: ward proficiency, battlefield ingenuity, clandestine network. He added margin notes on training curriculum, trapcraft, ward upkeep, reconnaissance algorithms, code-breaking finesse. Valen regarded the parchments thoughtfully. "Your order will need supply lines and vessels of its own. The Auric Dawn can serve in marsh operations, but will also construct lightweight strike barges for riverine fields." Desh agreed. "And mobile forge units for outposts. Traps demand constant replacement of stakes, nets, spike bolts. We'll requisition engineering detachments to accompany our core cadre." Valen clenched his jaw. "Time is short. The southern provinces still threaten rebellion, the coastal pirates grow bold, and necromantic cults spread rumors of the grimoire's return." Desh tapped his quill against the roster. "Each front needs a cipher unit, one for the Sunvale, one for the Ebon Marshes, one for the Borderlands, and one for the Sea Lanes, and a central garrison at Amarian to coordinate." Valen raised an eyebrow. 4 units, at least 300 personnel each. You have the Emperor's blessing." Desh glanced at his empty goblet. I'll secure funding in tomorrow's finance council. The order is underway. Valen nodded and stood. Rest, Master Decipherer. Tomorrow the capital awaits your blueprint for an empire secured by pattern and trap. The next morning, Dash rose at first light to survey the Imperial training grounds, an array of fortified compounds east of the city walls. Green lawns were crossed by trenches for mock traps, pavilions hosted arcane practice wards, obstacle courses tested recruits in stealth and marksmanship. He walked the grounds, assessing the existing facilities, a forge hall, an archery range, a small labyrinth of hedges for concealment drills. He marked each area in his notebook with potential modifications, adding concealed pits disguised by turf mats, embedding rune-inscribed boulder triggers, constructing retractable walls for siege simulations. He paused at the central watchtower, its stone walls braced with iron band. He climbed to the top and surveyed the city rooftops and distant horizon, where the frontier lords' castles rose beyond the veil. He noted wind currents above the battlements, the spacing of watchtowers on the walls, the narrow alleys between barracks, each detail he catalogued, chimneys for signal placement, roof slopes for stealth descent, window heights for grappling hook calibration. At the tower's base, he found Solyndra, waiting beneath a tapestry of the moonlit accord. She held a sealed scroll. The council has approved your order, she said. Enrollment begins today. You may choose your core cadre from among the Empire's best. Des took the scroll. Thank you, I'll dive into selection immediately. Then we set forth. The city watched the Cipher Order and the Empire's might aligned under one pattern. Solyndra inclined her head. May your gift guide us well. He watched her depart and return to the training ground. His heart brimmed with purpose. He would forge the Cipher Order from raw talent, train them in cryptic arts, and trap mastery, and deploy them where the Empire most needed a watchful eye. He would write the field manuals, design the ward matrix grids, and train his fellow tacticians to see patterns no one else could. As the sun rose high over Amarion's gleaming spires, Desh Kalder set quill to parchment, ready to write the next chapter of the Empire's defense. One puzzle at a time, one trap at a time, one pattern at a time, until no threat mortal or spectral could remain unseen. The morning sun struck Amarion's eastern sky as Desh Kalder stepped into the Hall of Records. Escorted by Vale and Adric Valen, the cavernous chamber hummed with candlelight and the soft rustle of parchment. Scribes perched at high desks catalogued new orders, grants and recruit petitions for the Order of the Cipher. At the center, a raised dais held stacks of enrollment ledgers and supply requisitions. Desh climbed the steps, unrolling a large parchment that detailed his proposed cadre structure. He pointed to a hexagonal diagram divided into 8 divisions. Field intelligence, trap engineering, ward maintenance, logistics, arcane research, rapid deployment, cryptanalysis and diplomatic liaison. Each spoke connected to a central hub labeled Master Decipherer. Under the diagram lay his candidate selection list, names drawn from Frontier Ventures, the Shadow Spire Expedition, and key intelligence networks. We begin with 300 recruits, he announced to Vale and Valen, with 30 specialists in each division. Today we finalize the first 100, the core Cipher Circle. Vale surveyed the roster. I recognize half the names, she said. Meron, Kirkwood, field captains from Cliffhaven, Soren's apprentice, ward spinner Lucin, and that spy you mentioned, Ravenna of the Black Market Network. Des nodded. Ravenna's ability to infiltrate is unmatched. She will lead cryptanalysis. Field intelligence includes Captain Meron's veterans and Borderland Rangers. Trap engineering enlists Halrin's lead engineer from the Sunvale. Ward maintenance under Archmage, Soren's oversight requires his best acolytes. Logistics, we place under Quartermaster Dana Havros. Efficient and discreet. Rapid deployment will draw on the Imperial Marines who protected the Marsh Flotilla. Arcane research, I propose, under Soren and Solendra's guidance for spectral rift studies. Diplomatic liaison, we assign to Ambassador General Dara, forging ties to local lords. Edric tapped the parchment, and supplies. Each division needs field equipment, trap kits, ward crystals, reconnaissance kit, code-breaking arrays. Des pointed to margin. Requisitions for 5,000 woodworked stakes, 20,000 spectral bolt heads, ward crystal columns, 6 mobile forge wagons, 4 topographic mapping engines, and encryption tablets etched with soul glass cord, all approved in the Emperor's budget decree. Vale whistled. You'll have the full arsenal of the Empire. Des allowed a brief smile. But we build discipline and secrecy first. I will issue the oath of silence. No recruit speaks of cipher operations to outside. Breach the oath, and the circle expunges you. Edric grinned. Secrecy is key. Let me draft the ward contracts, and binding seals for each recruit's signature. Des unrolled a smaller scroll. Have them sign here, here, and here. under runes of silence and loyalty. Their names become both privilege and vow. He handed the scroll to Vale. I'll oversee the signatures. You arrange muster at the East Gallery. Vale saluted. Right away. As she departed, Des turned to Edric. I'll escort Ravenna to secure her cryptanalysis suite. Then I must meet Solyndra to review runic lab progress for expanded ward research. Edric nodded. I'll handle the trap kit assembly orders. See you by midday. In the shadowy corridors behind the Hall of Records, Des found Ravenna waiting beside a brazed iron door. Her dark cloak was hooded, her eyes flicked with alert intelligence. She bowed. Master Decipherer. Des offered a curt nod. Your suite is prepared in the archive annex room. 9TU will find a private antechamber for your sources. Codex mecha tablet and folding map table with integrated wind and tide charts. Secure any intercepted communications there. National code servers will upload every hour. Ravenna's lips curved. Efficient. I'll require a half-dozen hushword crystals for field operations. Coders I trust. Des tapped his ledger. Noted. Quartermaster Havros will deliver them within the hour. Your first assignment, decrypt the Iron Council's sabotage networks, trace their supply lines and report their key agents. Locate the saboteur cells in the Sun Vale. Ravenna folded her arms. I will begin immediately. Expect results by tomorrow's dawn. Des nodded. I trust your discretion. Keep our work hidden. She inclined her head and disappeared down the corridor. Des briskly retraced his steps toward Solendra's chamber. The Archmage's sanctum lay atop a winding stairway behind the War Council, sealed by runic wards that flared as Des approached. He placed his palm against the ward disc engraved with the Archivist's eye symbol. The seals shimmered and parted, admitting him into a circular room, hung with crystal orb clusters, floating scroll fragments and shelves of esoteric tomes. At the center hovered a levitating table of runic glass, where Archmage Selendra studied spectral patterns detected in the borderlands. Calder, she greeted, serene as ever. Your return was timely. I have simulation data from Hollow Containment Anomaly. We can expand our buffer run strategies, but I need your insight on integrating these new glyph matrices. Des stepped forward and glanced at the floating data graphs of ward failure rates, pulse frequencies of elemental storms, and spectral flux readings. The current buffer trenches require a dual-layer approach. Embed runic coil conduits beneath salt lines, then overlay them with rooted mosaic glyphs that resonate at half frequency, that shears off half the specter's energy before it reaches the main ward. Solendra's eyes gleamed. Yes, and if we orient the mosaic glyphs to the meridian of duality, 62 degrees east, resonance overlaps with the void sphere we harnessed at the spire. It will amplify buffer absorption by 30%. Des nodded, tapping his quill on a crystal panel. We'll need to recalibrate the field matrices at Pagus Bastion and Cragguard Hold. I'll draft new ward diagrams. Solendra waved a hand to summon enchanted inks. I'll inscribe them myself. Then we must train the Ward Maintenance Division in their application. We cannot trust regional mages untrained in these procedures. Des collected printed diagrams. I'll schedule induction lessons for the first batch of Ward Maintenance recruits at dawn. We must build this cadre quickly. Each frontier sector needs at least 2 maintenance squads on rotation. Elendra folded the runic inscribed papers. Agreed. I will coordinate with House Azurglow's arcane forges to replicate the new glyph ingots. The supply will arrive within 3 days. Des bowed. Thank you. Our order grows stronger. Solendra's gaze softened. And wise. Let us ensure the Empire never again faces breaches like those in the Borderlands. That afternoon, Des assembled the first 100 recruits in the Hall of Records East Gallery. Red velvet banners of the Cipher Order hung from the rafter. Recruits in varied attire, heavy militia armor, hooded cloaks, engineers' leathers, arcane threads stood attention. Vel and Edric stood by his side. Des stepped onto a raised dais. Welcome to the Order of the Cipher. By imperial decree, you are charged with safeguarding the Empire's hidden threats through pattern and trap, ward and code. Today, you become the shield and sword against raiders, specters, sabotage, and shadowborn cults. Your oath binds you to silence. Your skills will defend our people, and your loyalty to the War Council will ensure unity of command. He held up a small black crystal. Repeat after me, by ink and iron, by ward and wire, I stand ever vigilant as Cipher sworn. The recruits echoed in unison, voices resolute. By ink and iron, by ward and wire, I stand ever vigilant as Cipher sworn. Des nodded. Then rise, Cipher recruits. Your first mission assignments will be detailed in your caseload ledgers. Field intelligence to the Sunvale, trap engineering to Cliffhaven, ward maintenance to the Borderlands, rapid deployment to the Ebon Market. Cryptanalysis and arcane research remain here in Amerium to intercept threats before they cross our borders. Diplomatic liaisons will accompany envoys to secure agreements with frontier lords. He gestured to Vel. Lieutenant Vel will oversee deployment order. Report to the muster grounds immediately. He turned to Edric. Engineer Velen will deliver your trap kits and ward matrices. Collect them in the annex. The recruits dispersed in disciplined ranks. Des watched them file out, each bearing the scribbled scrolls of their mission. He felt both pride and responsibility. His order was nascent, but already shaping the Empire's defense. He gathered his remaining recruits and staff for a final brief. That evening, Des met Merun and Vel in the city's war room. A secure chamber of carved obsidian walls and glowing map tables. Each map displayed the 6 active Cipher divisions and their deployments. Lantern glow reflected off runic controls, and mages' swirling sigils hovered at ready. Merun tapped a marker on the marsh region. Trap engineering has set up the marsh flotilla's return routes. Anti-quagmire nets installed. Will ferry supplies east by week's end. Vel traced a line to the Sunvale zones. Field intelligence has cataloged new raider concentration. Rapid deployment units will patrol the convoys starting tomorrow. Des pointed to spectral hotspots in the Borderlands. Ward maintenance squads complete buffer installs at Pagos Bastion. We're ready for Spectre sweeps at midnight. He turned to Velen. Arcane research and cryptanalysis have decoded half the Iron Council's networks. Ravenna's team found the Sabotage Ring's leadership meeting scheduled for burial. We'll disrupt them within 3 days. Adric indicated a red mark. Olympic liaison to Yuzarna Court. Dar has secured consent from the Border Duchess to station Cipher units inside her lands. Des folded his arms. Then the order is active on every major front. We will hold our ground, cut off threats before they spread, and keep the Empire secure. Remember, secrecy and coordination are our greatest weapons. Beyond this room, no one must know our full plans. Murad and Vil nodded. The holographic map shifted to display outward geo-frontiers, each sector protected by wards and trap networks. Des exhaled, heart steady. He allowed himself a moment to observe the room. The faint hum of glyph circuitry, the disciplined posture of officers, the gentle flicker of rune fire in the vents. This was his pattern made manifest. A living defense woven through fields, caverns, marsh, and spire. The War Council had entrusted him with the Grimoire's power, the Cipher's formation, and the Empire's future. Now his order moved as one across the frontier, each recruit a node in the network he had deciphered. He stepped back, lantern glow on his face, mind already racing ahead. How to integrate next wave of recruits, refine trap designs, expand arcane research into Shadow Rift suppression, and one day stand again before the Hall of Records to plot new courses against threats unseen. Des Calder, the Decipherer, looked at the map's glowing lines and saw not just borders but lifelines, patterns of hope and vigilance. He raised his chin. The Empire was secure, this night, and all nights to come, under his watch.